Hello to my family, friends, and audience in India, America, and abroad. It's Sunny Sharma back with his promised examination into um, the New Left movement. I did an introduction to the New Left movement and some of the ideas that will be presented in a subsequent two-part series. This is part one of two. Again, this is the movement of the New Left, 1950 to 1975, a brief history with documents by Van Goes, the Bedford series in history and culture, 45 historical documents, examination by Sunny Sharma, June 17th, 2026, essential documents part one, and here we go. The purpose of the creation of the United Nations was to prevent further military and economic catastrophe around the world. For this reason, the Committee for a Sane Nuclear Policy, composed of 48 sponsors, including Eleanor Roosevelt, religious and academic leaders, was guided by the same sentiment, with support from 130 chapters and 25,000 members. This organization was initiated and founded through a New York Times advertisement on November 15th, 1957, in which 2,500 people responded, leading to its reprinting in 32 newspapers around the country. Their efforts contributed significantly to the Limited Test Ban Treaty of 1963. This document is reflective of this idealistic period, exemplifying visionary humanitarianism to resolve the existential crisis the world was facing due to the proliferation of nuclear material. New Left organizations were reimagining what makes a good society and community. Quote, the slogans and arguments that belong to the world of competitive national sovereignties, a world of plot and counterplot, no longer fit the world of today or tomorrow. We can earn the right to explore other planets only as we make this one safe and fit for human habitation. Indeed, the test of a nation's right to survive today is measured not by the size of its bombs or the range of its missiles, but by the size and range of its concern for the human community as a whole. Much of this language coincided with the rhetoric and spirit of the civil rights era and other leaders who sought both philosophically and politically to create a society that was socially inclusive, where people were connected but also economically viable, where individuals could achieve some degree of prosperity. However, this united front to save the world wasn't just intellectual, it was also characterized by mass organized protest, especially among a more radicalized youth. Another insightful document from the time period was Dale Johnson's On the Ideology of Campus Revolution, May 1961, which discusses the importance of a nonviolent philosophical approach to combat a rising conservatism underlying a dead, contemporary liberalism that in many ways foreshadowed future outcomes. Johnson was active in a number of movements. He was a Stanford graduate and executive secretary of the Palo Alto chapter of FPCC. He wrote about the rise in Bay Area student radicalism. He organized the campus political party Slate. He picketed at the Woolworth's department store to show solidarity with Southern sit-ins. He was involved in anti-nuclear protests and rallies against ROTC, and he described the powerful influence of the Cuban Revolution in radicalizing young Americans, which involved opposition to the Bay of Pigs invasion in April 1961. Johnson understands that what links individualism with mass action is, quote, the link which binds the various tendencies within the student movement is a firm belief in the value and necessity of active dissent. He highlights that this dissent is only successful if the student body determines what they stand in support of and not just what they actively dissent against. To him, this can make nonviolent action truly revolutionary rather than merely reformist. It is clear from such documents that young people were thinking critically about not just theoretical principles, but also how to learn from real active struggle in a constant process to sharpen their political analysis during the New Left period. There are several other documents from the early 1960s from Fannie Lou Hamer, who was a leader of SNCC, and the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party, MFDP, who demonstrated a politics for the marginalized. Students for a Democratic Society, that was very central to the student movement, especially in places like California, Chicago, and New York. and even Dr. King's well-known letter from a Birmingham jail that highlighted minorities can wait no longer for equality after 340 years of labor, while describing the fundamental issue with institutional racism and its effect on black social reality. However, there are lesser-known civil rights figures by some Americans, such as John Lewis, who gave a rousing indictment of the President John F. Kennedy's administration through his speech, "Wake Up America," at the 1963 March on Washington. The book highlights that the young 23-year-old Lewis's speech in many ways foreshadowed the growing Black Power movement in America that criticized white supremacy and called for a revolutionary change to years of mistrust and bond labor with minimal compensation. Quote, "In the struggle, we must seek more than civil rights. We must work for the community of love, peace, and true brotherhood." Lewis maintains in the speech that a revolution to destroy Jim Crow must take place due to the inability of the Democrats and Republicans to adhere to the basic principles of the Declaration of Independence. Mario Salvo, a major spokesman of the free speech movement and a graduate student in philosophy at Berkeley, who participated in the Freedom Summer Project of 1964, in a brilliant piece/document called "An End to History," relates how the university system had the proclivity to create well-behaved students rather than radicals working for the larger purpose of human dignity that truly underlied the student movement at Berkeley and other places. Salvo declares that in the process of students sacrificing their principles, they must suppress the most creative impulses that they have. This is a prior condition for being part of the system. In many ways, Salvo was foretelling how the Second Reconstruction was changing the nature of employment to the extent that organized capacity for community building was severely degenerating to the point that most career paths lack the fundamental purpose for the transformation of society through social justice. Nonetheless, he believed, like in every era of history, there was a minority of leaders who refused to be, quote, "standardized, replaceable, and irrelevant." President Lyndon Baines Johnson, who succeeded President JFK after he was assassinated, was pushed by the civil rights movement to enact groundbreaking legislation on behalf of "we the people." In a speech titled "The American Promise: Special Message to the Congress," President LBJ responds directly to the bloody repression of protests in Selma, Alabama, today known as Bloody Sunday, on March 15, 1965. In affirming, quote, "We shall overcome," President LBJ proposed the 1965 Voting Rights Act to give African Americans a share in power in the government, which passed in August 1965. The author Ghost states, "It was the most direct intervention in state and local politics since Reconstruction." President LBJ emphatically concludes at the end of the speech that, quote, "These are the enemies: poverty, ignorance, disease, not our fellow man, not our neighbor." This speech marked a significant step into the American future, dictated on a mandate for universal franchise and equality. The Students for a Democratic Society, SDS President Paul Potter, in a speech called today, "The Incredible War," denounces the cultural genocide happening in Vietnam, instigated by the U.S. government. In linking the struggle of poor people in America with that of the marginalized in Vietnam, this speech marked a, quote, "new solidarity across national borders and the Cold War divide." Potter's resounding speech denounces the entirety of the American military-industrial complex. Quote, "What kind of system is it that disenfranchises people in the South, leaves millions upon millions of people throughout the country impoverished and excluded from the mainstream and promise of American society, that creates faceless and terrible bureaucracies and makes those the place where people spend their lives and do their work, that consistently puts material values before human values, and still persists in calling itself free and still persists in finding itself fit to police the world?" Potter insists that a massive cross-national social movement must be built to foster a better society because, quote, "All our lives, our destinies, our very hopes to live depend on our ability to overcome that system." The Black Panther Party for Self-Defense created the 10-point program "What We Want, What We Believe," authored by its founders Huey P. Newton and Bobby Seale. It didn't just demand basic rights, but a United Nations referendum concerning the injustices faced by Black people in America. Some notable insights include the last sentence of point 5 on the necessity of a proper education for Blacks. Quote, if a man does not have knowledge of himself and his position in society and the world, then he has little chance to relate to anything else. Point 8 speaks to prison abolitionism. Quote, we want freedom for all Black men held in federal, state, and county and city prisons and jails. We believe that all Black people should be released from the many jails and prisons because they have not received a fair and impartial trial. In point 9, demanding the need for a trial of a jury of Black peers from one's community, Seal and Newton claim that the criminal justice system does not consider nor understand the, quote, average reasoning man of the Black community when it comes to court trials. The last point 10 is the most ambitious and threatening, underlying the logic of the U.S. Declaration of Independence that if basic rights and freedoms are not realized for Black citizens, then the government must be reformed or abolished. The National Organization for Women was founded upon the urgent need to right the wrongs of a history of losses in pay, employment status, representation in politics, professional careers, and higher education. Stokely Carmichael was a public face of Black Power from 1966 to 1968 through his involvement as the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee chairman and rousing oratory. He helped build an all-Black political party, the Lowndes County Freedom Organization, which pioneered the imagery of the Black Panthers. Emphasizing Black power in this excerpt with Charles V. Hamilton, Carmichael insists on the necessity for a Black voting bloc. Although this position is seen as too radical by many moderate Americans, Carmichael and Hamilton state that by this we mean that group solidarity is necessary before a group can operate effectively from a bargaining position of strength in a pluralistic society, end quote. This demand for collective representation as a group, especially in the South where there is a history of voting discrimination, underlies the political battle happening today where Black electoral power is being significantly challenged. Dr. King, in one of his most controversial speeches at the Riverside Church in New York City, known as the Declaration of Independence from the War in Vietnam, April 4th, 1967, states that the U.S. is, quote, the greatest purveyor of violence in the world, and it must get on the right side of the world revolution. His commitment to nonviolence is exalted through the speech, whereby he says, quote, as we counsel young men concerning military service, we must clarify for them our nation's role in Vietnam and challenge them with the alternative of conscientious objection. I am pleased to say that this is the path now being chosen by more than 70 students at my own alma mater, Morehouse College, end quote. He not only maintains we must establish a timeline to remove troops from Vietnam, he also claims that, quote, we will be marching and attending rallies without end unless there is a significant and profound change in American life and policy. He also refers back to President JFK's provocative words 5 years ago that those who make peaceful revolution impossible will make violent revolution inevitable. More than anything, Dr. King advocates for a revolution of values to defeat the triplets of racism, materialism, and militarism to accommodate the revolutionary times we are living in. This means a drastic change to Western society, which is centered around American hegemony, and a warning of the crisis of civilization occurring, whereby, quote, a nation that continues year after year to spend more money on military defense than on programs of social upliftment is approaching spiritual death. The Western nations that initiated so much of that revolutionary spirit of the modern world have now become the arch anti-revolutionaries. Our only hope today lies in our ability to recapture the revolutionary spirit. Dr. King was severely criticized for this speech, particularly for his opposition to the Vietnam War. Yet the more radical position he adopted brought him closer to Black Power proponents, including the position held by revolutionary young people like John R. Lewis. Thank you for listening to my short presentation on Essential Documents Part 1, and please see my second part, on my Part 2 examination of the documents that concludes my examination of critical New Left documents, highlighting one of the pinnacles of unionized and organized power in American history. Thank you.